Logan Federico was a 22-year-old aspiring elementary school teacher whose life was violently ended in the early morning hours of May 3rd, 2025. Logan grew up in Waxhaw, a small town in Union County, North Carolina, situated near the border with South Carolina. She was the daughter of Stephen and Melissa Federico and the older sister to her beloved younger brother Jacob. The family was close-knit, making sure to uphold family traditions to keep their bond strong. One such tradition was simply exchanging a nightly text message. Every evening, the family would send each other messages reading, "Good night, we love you." This small act became a sacred part of their family life, a reassurance that despite the busy demands of work, school, and social commitments, they remained tethered to one another. On the night of May 2nd, 2025, Stephen sent his regular message to Logan. However, he never received a reply, later saying that he is still waiting for her response months later in an interview. Stephen, who worked in construction, described his relationship with his daughter as immensely close. He mentioned how Logan viewed him as her hero, which pained Stephen as he couldn't help her when she needed help the most. Logan graduated from Marvin Ridge High School in Waxhaw in 2021. Following graduation, she enrolled at South Piedmont Community College, where she pursued her education degree with plans to transfer to a four-year university. Logan's path to teaching was not immediate or obvious. For much of her late teens and early 20s, she was still exploring her interests, working multiple jobs, and figuring out what direction her life would take. But in the summer of 2024, something clicked. Neighbors asked Logan to babysit their children full-time during the summer months. This experience proved transformative. Suddenly, Logan's trajectory gained focus and momentum. Her father said that she started really locking in on her schoolwork with a passion. She wanted a role in life where she could impact the future of kids. While attending community college, Logan also worked two jobs, one of which was bartending at Caroline Steep Sports Bar in Ballantyne. On May 3rd, 2025, Logan would find herself in the middle of a violent crime spree involving systematic failures of the justice system. The incident took place at the 2700 block of Cypress Street in Columbia, South Carolina, which sits in a quiet neighborhood adjacent to the University of South Carolina campus. The area is populated predominantly by rental properties occupied by USC students, many of them fraternity members living in shared houses. Logan was staying at one such rental home during the first weekend of May. She had made the roughly 90-minute drive south from Waxhaw to visit friends who attended USC. The trip was not originally scheduled for that particular weekend. Logan had initially planned to visit on Thursday, May 1st, but those plans fell through, so she rescheduled for the following day, a decision that would prove tragic. On the evening of May 2nd, Logan and her friends enjoyed a typical night out in Columbia. The group returned to the rental home before 3 a.m. on Saturday, May 3rd. Upon entering the home, the group dispersed to their respective bedrooms, planning to sleep late on Saturday morning and recover from their night out. Logan settled into the guest room where she was staying. However, no one locked the doors. Unbeknownst to Logan and her friends, a predator was already roaming the neighborhood. The said predator was 30-year-old Alexander Dickey. He was scouring the area, searching for opportunities to steal not long after the group returned home. Dickey had driven a stolen vehicle into the neighborhood and parked on the street. He began targeting homes, testing doors, and looking for easy entry points. He first broke into a home adjacent to the rental property where Logan was staying. He moved through the residence, rummaging through rooms and searching for valuables. During this burglary, Dickey stole several items, including keys to a vehicle, a firearm, described in some reports as a shotgun, credit cards, and a wallet. With these stolen goods in hand, Dickey moved to the neighboring property, the rental home where Logan lay sleeping. Entering the second residence, he continued his burglary. He stole additional items, including more credit and debit cards. Then, while inside the home, Dickey entered the room where Logan was located. What happened next has been described by authorities and Logan's father as terrible and brutal. She was simply a victim of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In his congressional testimony months later, Stephen provided graphic details about his daughter's death. According to his account, Logan was, quote, dragged out of bed, naked, forced on her knees with her hands over her head, begging for her life, before Dickey shot her. Nancy Grace, the television crime commentator who later covered the case extensively, emphasized this point in a broadcast. She said, "At first we were told she was killed in her sleep, just like we were told in the Idaho prosecution. They said the 4 victims were killed in their sleep, like they fell asleep and never woke up. That's not what happened there, and that's not what happened here. She was forced out of bed naked to kneel at the feet of her killer before she was executed dead in cold blood. That's what happened." There were no other apparent signs of injury on her body beyond the gunshot wound. After shooting Logan, Dickey allegedly ransacked her belongings, searching for money and valuables. Her friends, sleeping in other rooms of the house, did not immediately hear the gunshot, which has been attributed to the size of the house, the late hour, and the possibility that residents were in deep sleep. Logan's body lay on the floor of the guest room for approximately 7 hours before it was discovered. Around 11 a.m. on May 3rd, friends and roommates in the Cypress Street rental home began to stir. Some reports suggest that the group was awakened by sounds in the house or became concerned when Logan failed to emerge from her room. Eventually, they made the decision to enter her room to check on her, and that's when they found her lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. At 11:14 a.m., a call to authorities was placed reporting a stolen vehicle from one of the Cypress Street homes. 1 minute later, a second call came in, this one reporting that a female victim had been found deceased inside a home. After murdering Logan, Dickey fled in a stolen vehicle, taking with him various pieces of stolen property. Rather than attempting to disappear or lie low, he embarked on what was described as a shopping spree. Dickey drove the stolen vehicle to West Columbia and began making purchases at multiple stores in Lexington County using Logan's stolen cards. Police would later review security camera footage from businesses listed in Logan's bank transaction records and identified Dickey on video. Investigators recognized him immediately, not through sophisticated facial recognition technology, but because they had arrested him multiple times before. Afterward, Dickey continued driving to Saluda County, where he attempted to make additional purchases. It was here that his spree ended as his stolen vehicle broke down. Stranded, Dickey made a decision that would ultimately lead to his capture. He called a towing company and arranged for the disabled vehicle to be transported to a residence in Gaston, South Carolina. The home belonged to a female acquaintance of Dickey's. By this point, law enforcement had connected the dots between Logan's murder, the stolen vehicle, and the fraudulent credit card transactions. The Columbia Police Department was working in coordination with the Lexington County Sheriff's Office and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division to track Dickey's movements. When Dickey called for the tow truck, investigators were able to trace the call and identify the Gaston residence as his destination. As law enforcement from multiple agencies converged on the Gaston home where the stolen vehicle had been towed, Dickey fled into nearby woods. This triggered an intensive manhunt that lasted through the night of May 3rd and into the morning of May 4th. The search was conducted under severe weather conditions, with officers tracking Dickey through wooded terrain in darkness and rain. Around 4 p.m. on Sunday, May 4th, a resident of Lexington County reported seeing a man emerge from the woods and steal a vehicle. The description matched Alexander Dickey. He drove the newly stolen vehicle a short distance before wrecking it. He then fled on foot and made his way back to the same Gaston residence where the original stolen vehicle had been towed, the home of his acquaintance. This time, Dickey forced entry into the home, which was unoccupied at the time. He barricaded himself inside as law enforcement officers surrounded the property. Officers issued repeated commands for Dickey to surrender. Instead of complying, Dickey set the home on fire. As smoke and flames began to engulf the structure, deputies made the decision to enter the burning building. They found Dickey inside the master bathroom and extracted him through a window. He was immediately taken into custody and transported to a hospital. After being medically cleared, he was booked into the Lexington County Detention Center. Afterward, investigators arrived at the detention center and interviewed Dickey for several hours. A Lexington County judge promptly denied bond on the Lexington County charges, which included first-degree burglary and second-degree arson. Columbia Police Department investigators subsequently secured arrest warrants charging Dickey with an extensive list of crimes related to Logan's murder and the associated crime spree. At 30 years old, Dickey had nearly 40 arrests, at least 25 felony charges, and a decade-long pattern of violence. Despite this, he had spent only approximately 600 days in prison. His freedom on May 3rd, 2025, preceding the incident with Logan, was not the result of rehabilitation or second chances earned. It was the product of systemic incompetence, bureaucratic failures, and lenient plea bargaining that allowed a dangerous predator to slip through the cracks again and again until an innocent young woman paid the ultimate price. Stephen Federico himself calculated that Dickey had been committing an average of 2.65 crimes per year since he was 15 years old. Court records and law enforcement databases reveal that his earliest documented arrest occurred on April 9, 2013, when he was approximately 18 years old. The most pivotal and perhaps most damaging failure in Dickey's criminal history occurred in 2014, when he was charged with burglary in Lexington County. This case, more than any other, exemplified how incompetence transformed what should have been an open and shut case of repeat offender prosecution into another opportunity for Dickey to avoid serious prison time. In November 2014, he pleaded guilty to second-degree nonviolent burglary. Under normal circumstances, Dickey would have faced enhanced sentencing as a repeat offender. South Carolina law provides for significantly longer sentences when defendants have previous convictions for similar crimes, precisely to protect the public from habitual criminals. But Dickey's prior convictions from other South Carolina counties were missing from his official report. The prosecutor handling the 2014 case, reviewing Dickey's report before making a sentencing recommendation, saw what appeared to be a defendant with no significant prior criminal history. The judge, presented with a plea agreement based on that incomplete information, sentenced Dickey as a first-time offender. He received a 10-year sentence, but it was entirely suspended, meaning he would serve no prison time as long as he complied with probation conditions. Instead of being locked away for years as a repeat burglar, Dickey walked free. The second major failure in Dickey's criminal history occurred in 2023, just 2 years before the event involving Logan. He was charged with first-degree burglary. This was a serious felony charge that, given his extensive criminal history, should have resulted in substantial prison time. However, through a plea agreement, the charge was reduced to third-degree burglary, a lesser offense that carried a shorter maximum sentence. Dickey pleaded guilty to the reduced charge and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Even this reduced sentence, if fully served, would have kept Dickey incarcerated through May 2028, but instead, he did not even serve half of his sentence. He was credited with over 410 days of time already served and was granted additional sentence reductions for good behavior while incarcerated. In early 2024, after serving just 410 days, Dickey was released from prison and placed on probation. As of now, Dickey has already been charged and indicted. He was indicted on June 25, 2025, on 12 charges and faces additional charges. Dickey remains in custody without bond at the Lexington County Detention Center, where he has been held since his arrest on May 4th, 2025. Multiple judges have denied bond, and he will remain incarcerated until his case is resolved. As of January 4th, 2026, no trial date has been publicly announced or set. The case remains in pre-trial status approximately 8 months after the murder occurred. Born on February 22, 1955 in Bismarck, North Dakota, Arlis Dykma grew up in a tight-knit, conservative community where faith and family were the central pillars of life. Her father, Marvin, was a respected figure in the community, and her upbringing was sheltered, grounded in the values of the Reformed Church. By all accounts, Arlis was vibrant, popular, and social. At Bismarck High School, she was a standout figure selected for the cheerleading squad for 3 consecutive years. She was also described by friends and teachers as optimistic, kind, and trusting. It was at Bismarck High that she began dating Bruce D. Perry, a fellow student who seemed to match up well with her. Bruce was an athlete, a track runner, and a high-achieving student with his sights set on medicine. They became high school sweethearts, a couple that seemed destined for success. While Bruce graduated and moved to California to begin his pre-med studies at Stanford University in 1973, Arlis stayed behind in Bismarck. She attended Bismarck Junior College for a year, working and preparing for their future life together. During this year of separation, she devoted much of her time to her church. The couple reunited in the summer of 1974. On August 17th, Arlis and Bruce were married at the Reformed Church in Bismarck. She was 19, while Bruce was roughly the same age. Almost immediately after the wedding, the newlyweds packed their belongings and moved 1,500 miles west to Palo Alto, California. They settled into Quillen Hall, a residence for married students located in Escondido Village on the Stanford campus. The transition was abrupt. Arlis went from being a beloved, well-known figure in a small community where she had lived her entire life to being an unknown individual in a sprawling, high-pressure academic environment. This marked a difficult period of adjustment for Arlis. While Bruce was immediately immersed in the rigorous demands of his sophomore pre-med curriculum, Arlis found herself adrift. She secured a job as a receptionist at a law firm in nearby Palo Alto. While this provided some structure to her days, it did not provide the community she craved. The cultural gap between Bismarck and the Bay Area in the mid-1970s was significant. Stanford was a hub of liberal thought, counterculture remnants, and intellectual intensity that could be alienating to someone with Arlis's traditional small-town background. Letters she wrote to friends back in North Dakota during these 6 weeks revealed her deep sense of loneliness. She expressed feeling out of place and isolated. The California lifestyle was foreign to her, and without her own circle of friends or the support system of her church back home, she relied heavily on Bruce for social interaction. Despite these challenges, Arlis sought to maintain her spiritual life. She was drawn to Stanford Memorial Church. The church was non-denominational, but offered a quiet, sacred space that reminded her of the comfort she found in her faith. She frequently went there to pray or simply to sit in the silence, finding a refuge from the unfamiliar world outside. Eventually, things would come to a head on October 12, 1974. That night, Arlis and Bruce were in their apartment, and around 11:30 p.m., they walked out to the parking lot to check their car's tire pressure. The young couple, both dealing with their own stressors, had just gotten into an argument. Arlis told Bruce she wanted to be alone and intended to go to Stanford Memorial Church to pray. Bruce acknowledged this and returned to their apartment, expecting her to return shortly. Witnesses on campus reported seeing Arlis walking toward the church shortly before midnight. She was dressed in blue jeans, a blouse, and a beige jacket. 2 witnesses inside the church recalled seeing her enter the church around 11:50 p.m. She took a seat in the pews on the left-hand side near the front row. At this time, the church was quiet but not empty. A few other visitors were leaving and the atmosphere was peaceful. At midnight, Stephen Crawford, the 28-year-old night security guard, began his closing routine. Crawford was a former police officer who had been demoted to security guard following a departmental restructuring, a setback that had reportedly left him bitter and resentful. Crawford later told investigators that he locked the main doors of the church at approximately 12:10 a.m. He claimed to have performed a sweep of the interior to ensure no one was left inside. In his initial statement, he asserted that the church was empty when he secured it. This claim was critical. If Arlis was inside, as witnesses suggested, Crawford either missed her during his sweep or found her and chose to ignore her. Given the open layout of the sanctuary, missing a person in the pews during a security sweep was highly improbable. Crawford stated that he returned to the church at 2 a.m. for a routine check. He told police he checked the exterior doors and found them all locked. This timeline implies that if Arlis was still inside the church after the lockup, then she was trapped inside for 2 hours. Back at Quillen Hall, Bruce grew increasingly anxious. Arlis had been gone for over 3 hours, far longer than a typical prayer session. At 3 a.m., he called the Stanford Police Department to report her missing. Officers were dispatched to check the area. They arrived at Memorial Church and checked the perimeter. They found the outer doors locked and observed no signs of forced entry. Crucially, because the doors were locked and the interior was dark, they did not enter the building. They assumed that if she wasn't outside, she wasn't going to be inside either. At 5:45 a.m., Crawford called the Stanford Police Dispatch and said the following: "We have a stiff here." Crawford claimed that when he arrived to unlock the church for the morning, he found the west side door forced open from the inside. He then led officers to the east transept of the church near the altar. When police entered, they found Arlis's body lying face up, positioned between the pews near the altar. An ice pick was buried deep into the base of her skull behind her left ear. The handle had snapped off, likely due to the force of the blow or a struggle, and was missing. From the waist down, she was nude with her jeans lying across her legs. A large altar candle was inserted into her private area and another was placed across her chest. These specific elements of the crime scene led to the popularity of the satanic narrative surrounding the crime. Initial forensic analysis identified a fluid found near the body which investigators initially believed to be sperm, but 1970s analysis later identified it as candle wax, complicating the sexual motive theory. However, faint traces of biological material, later identified as DNA, were present on her clothing. While there were signs that someone attempted to open a door from the inside, there was a lack of evidence indicating forced entry. This implied that the killer either hid inside the church before lockup, possessed a key to the building, or was let in by someone with a key. This detail should have focused suspicion narrowly on those with access, yet it was gradually obscured by the sensationalism of the satanic theories. As is standard procedure in almost all homicide investigations, the victim's husband was the first person of interest. Bruce Perry faced intense scrutiny in the immediate aftermath of his wife's death. He admitted to the argument and to letting Arlis walk to the church alone late at night, admissions that, while honest, painted a picture of domestic friction that police often view as a precursor to violence. However, Bruce's cooperative demeanor and consistent story began to clear him. He voluntarily submitted to interrogation and, crucially, a polygraph test. In 1974, law enforcement placed heavy weight on polygraph results, often treating them as near-definitive indicators of truthfulness. He passed his test with no signs of deception. Furthermore, witness testimony from his dorm mates at Quillen Hall corroborated his timeline, confirming he had returned home and remained there until he called the police at 3 a.m. While he was eventually cleared as a suspect, the cloud of suspicion hung over him for years. In 1974, DNA profiling did not exist. Investigators found a partial palm print on one of the candles used to desecrate Arlis's body, but it did not match Crawford or Bruce. They also collected biological samples from Arlis's jeans, stains that had biological material potentially containing the killer's DNA. However, without the technology to analyze them, these stains were essentially useless, locked away in an evidence locker for over 4 decades. With physical leads exhausted and the primary suspects seemingly cleared by polygraphs, the investigation stalled while the media continued to sensationalize the crime. During this period is when a compelling theory emerged. In the late 1970s, journalist Maury Terry began investigating the Son of Sam murders in New York City. He conducted extensive research into David Berkowitz's claims and developed a theory that fundamentally challenged the official narrative. Terry believed that David did not act alone, but was instead part of a nationwide satanic cult called the Process Church of the Final Judgment. According to Terry's research, this cult was allegedly responsible for ritualistic murders across the country, spanning multiple states and lasting years. The theory was particularly intriguing because it offered a compelling explanation for the bizarre and grotesque elements of the Arlis crime scene. The location near the altar, the ritualistic arrangement of the body, and the deliberate placement of candles in the victim's body all suggested to Terry the work of organized cult operatives rather than a lone predator. He meticulously compiled evidence, or what he believed was evidence, linking the Arlis Perry murder to other alleged cult killings and to Berkowitz's activities in New York. In 1987, Terry published his theories in the book The Ultimate Evil: The Search for the Sons of Sam. The book presented a detailed narrative that connected disparate crimes across the country through a supposed satanic network. For many readers and investigators, the book seemed to solve a puzzle that had confounded law enforcement. The theory exploded into the mainstream and gained immense credibility when David Berkowitz himself began communicating with investigators from his prison cell. Berkowitz, serving a 365-year sentence for the Son of Sam murders, sought to leverage his notoriety for purposes that remain unclear to this day. Some theorists suggest he wanted to dilute his own personal responsibility by suggesting he was part of a larger conspiracy. Others believe he simply relished the attention and the power that came from possessing or claiming to possess information about unsolved murders. Berkowitz began writing letters to the North Dakota Police Department, citing Arlis's home state as the origin point of the alleged cult's interest in her. In one package, he sent a book about witchcraft with handwritten margin notes. One note in particular burned itself into the minds of investigators. The note said, "Arlis Perry hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University." This specific reference convinced many, including experienced detectives, that Berkowitz possessed genuine inside knowledge of the crime. Berkowitz spun an elaborate tale that Arlis had been specifically targeted because she had attempted to convert cult members in Bismarck before moving to Stanford with her new husband. According to this narrative, the cult had followed her to Palo Alto to silence her and prevent her from continuing to spread her Christian faith. The murder in Berkowitz's telling was not a crime of assault, but a ritualistic execution designed to send a message to others who might oppose the cult's agenda. This theory fundamentally redirected the investigation. Detectives flew to New York to interview David Berkowitz in person, hoping he would provide verifiable details that would confirm the theory. They also traveled to North Dakota to interview cult members that Berkowitz claimed had been involved in Arlis's death. Berkowitz was incredibly cryptic. He provided riddles, suggested connections, hinted at larger conspiracies, but offered nothing definitively provable. Every time investigators seemed close to confirming a detail, he would hedge or deflect, maintaining his mystique without ever providing information that could be verified or falsified. Fast forward to 2016, detectives took a fresh look at the evidence with a new perspective. The satanic angle was finally and definitively discarded in favor of Occam's razor, meaning the simplest explanation is often the best when multiple are present. In this case, it was the man with the keys who had committed the crime. Using modern DNA extraction techniques that were completely unavailable in the 1970s, criminologists isolated a DNA profile from the fluid and stains on Arlis's genes. The result was a definitive match to Stephen Crawford. This physical evidence directly contradicted Crawford's 1974 claim that he had merely found the body. On the morning of June 28, 2018, sheriff's deputies arrived at the Camden Avenue apartment complex in San Jose, where the 72-year-old Crawford lived. They had both a search warrant and an arrest warrant, equipped with the forensic evidence that had finally proven his guilt. Deputies knocked on the door and announced their presence as law enforcement. Through the window and open blinds, they observed Crawford sitting on his bed. Upon seeing the uniforms and recognizing the inevitable, Crawford produced a handgun. Deputies ordered him to drop the weapon, but instead of complying, Crawford fired a single fatal shot at himself. He died at the scene, bringing an end to his life and robbing the justice system of its opportunity to prosecute him in open court. A subsequent search of Crawford's apartment revealed that the murder had likely haunted or perhaps obsessed him for decades. Police found the jacket cover of Maury Terry's The Ultimate Evil, the very book that falsely attributed Crawford's crime to a satanic cult. It is speculated that Crawford kept this as a trophy, or perhaps out of dark amazement that the public had been so thoroughly deceived by theories that pointed away from him. A 2-page typed note was also found, believed to have been written around 2016 when detectives had interviewed him again regarding the renewed investigation. In the note, Crawford did not explicitly confess to the details of the murder, but expressed despair over the renewed investigation, stating, "I have no desire to spend the rest of my life in some 8x10 cell." It was later realized that in 1992, Crawford was arrested for a series of thefts at Stanford. He had been systematically stealing rare books and historical documents from the university libraries while he worked as a security guard. He was convicted and sentenced to prison for those crimes. He appeared to be a non-violent, albeit dishonest thief with no connection to Arlis's murder. For the Perry family and Bruce, the resolution brought closure but no justice in court. Bruce, who went on to become a renowned child psychiatrist and expert on trauma, lived under the cloud of this tragedy for over half his life. The psychological burden of suspicion and the loss of his young wife shaped his career and his understanding of human suffering. The sheriff of Santa Clara, Laurie Smith, stated after the incident, "We had enough evidence to arrest him, and we believe we would have had enough evidence to convict him. Had modern DNA technology and investigative techniques been available in 1974, the case would have been solved in days, not decades."